What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of On Target. Welcome back to Project Potter. My name is Kylie, your host, guys. This is our Hawkeye in review, episode 2, guys. If you haven't seen the channel before, go check out the other content, of course. These are going to be short reviews, guys. And unlike my other reviews, this is just kind of an intro and then my thoughts on the episode and then a score. So I wasn't crazy about the first episode, guys, the pilot. This one is much better. I will still say, though, that it's not quite like top tier Marvel for me. It's still missing so far. This one, guys, picks up right where the pilot ends, where Renner or Hawkeye is with Kate Bishop, and he's like, "Hey, how are you?" I really, really like the dynamic in this episode between Renner and Steinfeld, because it's very much like a father-daughter relationship where, she's super interested in Hawkeye. She loves Hawkeye. He goes to the apartment and there's like the giant target there, which is nice. And then she's got the suit and he's like, all right, well, just give me the suit so I can get back to my family. And she's like, oh yeah, of course. And she goes upstairs, she changes, and he's like, you sure nobody saw you or anything? And she's like, nope. And he's like, nobody saw your face? And she's like, no, put on the mask the whole time like a pro. And I was like, oh, I like this dynamic, this back and forth. And obviously Renner is like, or Hawkeye, I should say, is just like, he's an Avenger. He's very experienced. Thinks she's an amateur, and which she is. But he's like, hey, so don't make these rookie mistakes. And she's like, well, my name is on the buzzer outside. And then that's when the Tracksuit Mafia shows up again, which is not what I thought they would be, because they are like comedic relief when I was hoping they would be like a serious threat. But they are throwing Molotov cocktails in there, and there's a great part where Hawkeye catches one and throws it back, and they're like, oh, this is too much. And then she fires an arrow and everything goes up. The suit is surrounded by flames, and so they're like, oh, we gotta go, like, we'll worry about the suit later. Even though there's a fire extinguisher, Kate shoots it and it goes out there, but like you'd think they would have tried to get it or something and put out the fire. I don't know. The suit is like really important, but then they just he's like, oh, whatever, I'll just come back for it. Dude, obviously it's not going to be there. They have a great back and forth where they're walking there, and he's like, they have to go get supplies, and she's like, oh, where are you going? The safe house? And he's like, no, Tony sold that like 3 years ago. And she's like, that is sad on so many levels, which is great. And I think this takes place after Endgame. I'm not exactly sure when this takes place, but obviously pretty sure Tony is dead in this world. And the events of Endgame, I think, have already happened. So this great back and forth with Renner and Steinfeld, where they're walking down and she's talking about marketing, and she's like, your problem is you're the cool guy, but people want sincerity and honesty and openness. And he's like, oh, is that so? He's like, I'm not trying to market anything. He's like, I'm just me. And it's like, it's so true, dude. It's like Jeremy Renner doesn't need the fame, the fortune. Like, he just does it for the good. She's like, oh, you're walking on the outside. What a gentleman. And he's like, no, it's just because I have to hear you. But he's like, not because I want to hear you, because I can't on the other side. And she's like, oh, what happened with the hearing aid? And then he's like, and there's a great flashback scene where it shows like just like 4 different explosions from the previous like Avengers movies and stuff, where he's like, I lost track. And he's like, I don't know what caused this, but basically he's like, I can't hear shit. That was a really nice way to explain the hearing aid, because in the first episode I was like, oh, this, like when he's zoning out during the musical, I was like, why does he have a hearing aid? But it makes complete sense there, so I like that. He's like, I need to stash you somewhere, and she's like, stash me? She's like, I'm not a bag of money. He's like, you're right, a bag of money would be useful for me. And then she's like, a bag of money wouldn't know a safe house 10 blocks down the road. And so they go to, like, I guess I think it's like our aunt's house or something. I don't know. She like pretends to deliver a pizza and goes in there. There's just a lot of scenes in the show, guys, that are like just missing for me, where it's like, this is a good idea and it's just not being executed very well. He's like, hey, stay here, stay put. I'm going to go get my suit, because there's a really weird scene where he goes back to the apartment. She's like, don't you need my keys? And he's like, no, I'm good. And there's a fire, there's like a police line, do not cross. There's a crime scene set up basically, and there's a bunch of firefighters there. And Renner's got the hood on, and he just like walks into the police line. Nobody questions him. There's an open fire truck, and then he just like puts his bag in there, which you're assuming there are important things in there. Then he just takes like a loose fireman's jacket and hat, and nobody questions it. Like, nobody's like, what are you doing, dude? Like, it's really weird. And then he just walks in, and like nobody recognizes Jeremy Renner. Nobody is like, oh, it's Hawkeye. And it's like, in this world where the events of like the Battle of New York and everything happens and everyone knows the Avengers, I know Hawkeye is probably the least known character, and that's why Kate is like, your branding is hard. People would recognize Hawkeye, and it happens later in the episode where he looks in for the suit, and the guy's like, he's going upstairs, and the guy's like, it's clear up there, and then he just goes up there, and nobody is like, dude, I just said it's clear, you don't need to go up there. He just goes up there. there's just a lot of things that are missing where I feel like this was like, I don't know if it was rushed, but it's just not as polished as I would like it to be. And so he closes the door and he's like, oh, the suit's gone. Well, no shit, dude. And then he sees like NYC LARPers on the thing, and he's like, oh, and he looks up the Instagram account and he finds the guy who's already showing off the Ronin suit. And you think he'd be like watching the news and not putting that up, but Jeremy Renner goes and goes to a LARPing event. And this is the highlight of the episode, I think, because he like has to check in. He's like, he sees the guy and he's like, I just need to go talk to that guy. And she's like, no. She's like, you need to like, you can talk to him when the LARP is over. You need to participate. And he's like, well, when's it over? And she's like, midnight. And he's like, that's not going to work for me. He's like, it's going to take 2 minutes. And she's like, hey, those are cops and firefighters. She's like, it's going to get messy if you don't obey the rules. And he's like, fine. So he signs up. There's a great bit where he's like, let me just sign it. And then they're like, oh, here you go. And he takes a scroll and he's like, oh, and he's like, okay. And they're like, wait, that's your code. And he's like, okay. And this is a really funny bit. And then they're like, oh, your armor. And he's like, do I have to? And they're like, and so he puts on his armor. He gets a helmet too, but he doesn't put that on. And we get a great slow-mo scene where he has to go through and he's like, actually is having really fun with it. And Jeremy Renner is just awesome in the scene, dude, where he's fighting people and he's kind of just like nonchalantly going through and like hitting people because they're like, if you get hit in the torso, you're dead. But he gets surrounded once and he like spins and gets everyone. It's really, really fun. Eventually he gets up to the guy with the Ronin suit and he's like, all right, man. He's like, you got two options. Cause he's like, oh, can you just let me win and we can fake believe and you can die. You give me the suit. Or he's like, or I can real punch you and you're really going to fall down. And he's like, okay. He's like, we just have to do trial by combat, dude. We have to make it interesting. He's like, I'll give you the suit, but just like make me win. And so then there's this whole thing where they're like, drink the potion. And then he's like, I'm not gonna. And the people around him, he's like, he didn't drink the potion. And so they have like a little fight scene. And there's one guy who's my favorite character of the episode where he's the cling guy, where he's like the sound effects guy, where every time the sword's hit, he's like, cling, cling, cling. And I'm like, oh, this is hilarious, dude. Renner ends up dying in dramatic fashion, and dying, I should say. And he like gets into it a little bit. And the guy hands it, and I was like, okay. And then the guy hands over the suit, and I was like, oh, okay. I expected him to be like, no, I'm not going to give you the suit back or something. But it was too easy, I think, for the significance of that suit for him to get it back. But it's a fun scene, and he's like, hey, he's like, can you sign this for me or whatever? He's like, that's the best day of my life. And he's like, oh, you can call me Clint. And he's like, oh my God, okay, Clint. He's like, my name's Grills. And he's like, nice to meet you, Grills. And he is like, oh, you did have a little fun, right? And he's like, eh. And then he like walks away. Kate is like dealing with her own thing. She's still like really suspicious of Frank. And there's like the whole thing with Armand's death, and then it's on the news and they think it's Ronin. And at the beginning of the episode, Hawkeye is like, well, Clint, I should say, is like, well, you've been on the news 2 times in the last 48 hours and like you were fleeing the scene. So obviously they think it's you, which is weird because like no one picked up the suit is missing and whatever. I don't know. But it's a nice fencing scene where Kate is super suspicious of Frank, and we know something's off with Frank, obviously. Like she's like, oh, you cook and you're attentive and you're smart and all this stuff. And she's like, you almost seem too good to be true. And he's like, I assure you, I am not. And there's like a whole thing where she's like, oh, I'm a 2-time state champion fencer, which I think we saw a trophy for earlier in the episode when Clint's looking at all her trophies in the apartment. And so there's a fencing scene where she's like, don't let me win. He's like, oh, please, I'm not letting you win. And then obviously he is letting her win. And then he takes the mask off at the end and he's like, oh, okay, you were pretty good. And then she like goes to strike him in the face when his mask is up and he parries it and drops the sword. And she's like, I knew you were hiding something. And they're like, what are you doing? You're trying to like, you're just trying to stab him in the face. And she's like, no, I knew he would parry, which is why I was trying to prove to you that he's hiding something. But she's like, which I did. And he's like, and then it's like, obviously something's going on there, guys. There's a great scene where Renner calls his wife, and Linda Calderini is great, but she looks a little bit different in this one. I don't know why they didn't keep like her standard look with she had like an Endgame and stuff. She's still great in their family. The gingerbread dynamic is nice, and she's like, yo, you got 5 days to come back. That was all pretty good, but I love how they're open about their relationship where he's like, what's going on? And she's like, Tracksuit Mafia. She's like, those guys again? He's like, yeah. And she's like, what are you going to do? And he's like, catch and release. So where he's like intentionally getting caught. So he shows up at the apartment. They show up there. He's like, hey guys. And he's like, oh, you better I'm ready for a fight or whatever. And then he like just lets himself get hit in the knees. And then he like gets taken captive into the van. And he's like, I can see through the bag. And they're like, oh, we got him. And then it shows up and Renner is like not intimidated at all. And he's sitting there, even though there's a bunch of guns at him. And you're thinking like, look, I know you faced like Thanos and everything, Renner, but you got guns in your face, bro. You should be a little like scared, but he doesn't take them seriously at all. which is funny. And he's like, "Oh, where's Kate Bishop? Kate Bishop is the man in the mask." Or they're like, "Kate Bishop is Guy," and he's like, "Kate Bishop is not a guy." And he's like, "Kate Bishop is Guy." He's like, "Nope, not Guy." And then they're like, "Where's Kate Bishop?" And he's like, "I've never met Kate Bishop in my life." She falls through the ceiling. Her amazing Kate Bishop like purple outfit. She actually looks awesome. And she's like, "Oh," she's like, "I didn't know we're bringing guns here. Sorry, I did not bring one." And then she gets captured too. It's so funny though when she falls through the ceiling and the guy's like, "Found her, bro." The Tracksuit Mafia is funny. I just wish that they were. I don't want the main villains to be like comedic relief in this one. But at the end, guys, he goes up and he says, "We have both." And there's like some girl who I don't know who there's like a woman, I shouldn't say girl, a woman who's like listening to really loud music, and it's pretty cool. And then it like cuts to her face and then it cuts to black. This one, guys, I thought it was a lot better than the pilot. It's still not quite there for me. It doesn't feel like it's top tier Marvel, where like every episode of Loki I was like, "Oh my god, that's like some of the best things in the Marvel universe I've ever seen." This one, it just feels like B tier to me. So I like this one a lot more. It's a 7/7 for me. There's some good dynamics here. I love the dynamic between Renner and Steinfeld. I think it's awesome. Clinton and Kate's dynamic is really great. Frank's character, I'm like interested to see what he's hiding, but I'm like, yeah, he's very like, I don't know. It's very obvious that he's hiding something. So, and he's like way too. He's just weird. Some like the dialogue just seems off. I don't think the writers are doing a great job in this so far through 2 episodes, but I definitely enjoyed it more than the pilot. I'm still invested in the story enough, but I'm not. I'm just a little let down at the quality, I guess. So this is the first one that feels like it's sort of a miss for me with the Marvel stuff. But WandaVision was so different, but I really love the quality, and I think it was awesome in the mystery. And I was like, what's going on? This one, I'm just kind of like, it just feels like a side story, but hopefully it's going to get better. And I hear there's rumblings of something big happening. So I'm still catching up. But guys, that's another episode of On Target. So that's our review of episode 2 of Hawkeye. Again, I'm still going to keep watching it. I love Haley Steinfeld. I love Jeremy Renner. It's really like those 2 powerhouse actors are coming in, and I think Haley fits so perfectly in the MCU. I didn't talk about the good boy that they have, guys, the dog that seems to be playing a big role. We're staying in the apartment, or now staying in the other place, where Haley's like feeding him pizza. And I was like, all right, dude. She's like, "You want pizza?" And I'm like, go get some dog food, dude. Like, because I'm surprised they didn't buy some dog food in like the store when they were there or whatever, but I don't know. And the dog is probably going to play a bigger significance, or they just want to have it as like a nice touch. I don't really know, but yeah, either way, guys, thanks for checking out the channel. Like, comment, subscribe, and until next week, guys, peace.